General mentioned, great progress has been made to protect the human rights of children in war, and also including strengthening norms and securing commitments from warring parties to end violations. He mentioned also that 160,000 children have been released, but much more is needed. 2021 is the year that should be the year for the end of and elimination of child labor, according to ILO. Children are exposed to situations of terror and horror during armed conflict, experiences that may leave enduring impacts in post-traumatic stress disorder. Also, thousands of boys and girls are used as soldiers, cooks, spies, and also they have forced labor. Between 2005 and 2020, more than 93,000 children were verified as recruited and used by parties in the conflict. And of course, the actual number of cases is believed to be much higher. These abhorrent crimes against children should stop, and it couldn't stop if we don't do a lot. So we are here today with great panelists to discuss it from different perspectives. And I would like to start with our colleague in UNICEF to discuss more where we are now, what we can do, and how we can help these vulnerable children. And our panelist is Saju Thomas, Chief Child Protection, Gulf Area Office and Program Lead. Welcome, Saju.
Thank you so much, and thank you for organizing this and inviting us to be part of this panel. And I think it's always a great privilege to be part of conversations like this. Let me start with something that I was just reading. I mean, from the report of the Secretary General, on children and conflict. One of the messages that stands out there is when we speak about the protection of children affected by armed conflict is crucial to preventing conflict and sustaining peace. So the core message that comes across as the centrality of child protection for sustainable peace and prevention of conflict. So that, I think, is something that I would probably draw your attention to today. Child protection is a vast field, but we have always maintained that protecting children is probably one of your best, investments to make sure that we have a society that is cohesive and peaceful. So before I came to Abu Dhabi, and before I was in Egypt, and before I was in New York doing psychosocial support, I was in Sri Lanka for about 2.5 years, which was the end of the conflict. And I always go back to that experience when we have this topic for discussion, especially, from a protection point of view. So one of the interventions that we introduced in Egypt was about family reunification. There were thousands and thousands of children who were missing at the end of the conflict. People didn't know whether they're alive, whether they are dead, and where they are. And I think ICRC didn't have access those days. So we said, we need to look into this issue, because if you don't know where your children are, there is probably no reconciliation. So we started this intervention from scratch, really, because there was no system for family reunification or identifying missing children. We put a system in place, and then, the program slowly started reunifying children and caregivers, but only in few hundreds, because in most cases, children were unfortunately dead. But towards the end, I think there was a recognition that that was one of those interventions where we are moving towards reconciliation. Yeah. So whether the caregivers find their children or not, just by putting a system in place, and enabling parents and caregivers to find a closure. That itself was, I think, it's a significant step. I mean, The Economist did a piece around it, and it was highlighted as one of those initiatives that contributed to reconciliation. I speak about this experience mainly because the key message that I wanted to convey, protection in the form of response, protection by way of prevention, I think is critical in almost all emergencies. UNICEF just released the new child protection strategy from 2020 to 2030, and there are three strategic priorities. One is about social and behavioral change and determinants, social determinants. The other is around child protection systems, and the third is around humanitarian issues. So just again conveying the message that child protection and humanitarian context is central to what we do. And I would stop with maybe the point that you raised about where do we go from here. I think the experience so far is quite clear. We need stronger child protection systems, be it emergencies or be it normal development settings, humanitarian context or otherwise. We need to work towards stronger systems. We need to work towards making sure that we have enough social workers on the ground. And then, cases are, children are supported both in the form of prevention and response. Mental health and psychosocial support. It's not a new area. A lot of investment on this in the last many, many years. But for UNICEF, especially for this cycle, we have put a lot of emphasis on mental health and psychosocial well-being in all contexts, but definitely in emergencies for the reasons that I stated earlier. Focus on the well-being of children and families, prevention of violence definitely contributes towards sustainable peace. So that is definitely going to be our area of focus. And I think, we are all partners in this initiative. Couple of other areas that you already mentioned, monitoring and reporting of grave violations, that will continue to be the focus, because that's where actors are held accountable and there is response. Unaccompanied and separated children, reunifying children who are separated, that remains key. Of course, armed forces and detention, that again continues to be a focus. We're also seeing a lot of emphasis on gender-based violence, in specific humanitarian situations. Protection from sexual exploitation and abuse. We have had far too many cases where humanitarian actors themselves are part of the crime. So that again, there's a lot of emphasis. And then the final point on community engagement, it has always been there, but there is no solution, there's no lasting solution without meaningful engagement by communities. And I think we are trying different approaches. For example, in Iraq, we were trying to use technology to engage adolescents and community members on looking at the problems and solutions. So nothing new, not rocket science, but definitely having a lot more emphasis on systems strengthening, a lot more focus on mental health and psychosocial well-being as part of a response. And then the other areas I mentioned also remain focus areas. So I'll stop there. I can always come back into the conversation later. Thank you.
Thank you, Savi. I think it's important to discuss later, the mental health and psychosocial support, especially for reintegration, and how it's important and how we can raise awareness. So maybe later we can discuss it more. So For the next discussion, we would like to discuss it from UNHCR perspective, and with us we have Sarah Khan, the protection officer. So we are talking about child protection from a very general point of view. We would like to know more for refugee children, because we are totally aware that children in refugee camps are in danger, let's say, and they encounter more challenges if you compare it to other children in armed conflict. How UNHCR can help, and from a humanitarian context, how we can, the international community, humanitarian organization, how we can work together to make sure that refugee children are safe, and how we can enhance their protection and protect their human rights.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Khan, the Assistant Protection Officer in UNHCR Saudi Arabia, Riyadh office. First of all, I would like to thank King Salman Relief Center for the invitation. As always, the center is discussing one of the most important and critical topics, which is protecting children from exploitation in conflict. I would like to first ask if it's possible to just open the presentation. Great.
You can share it.
It's already there. Perfect. Okay. So let's say from UNHCR side, we will explore today the topic of protecting children in refugee camps from exploitation. Our discussion and our session today will cover a number of points, which are as follow. The second slide, please. Yes, the definition of child, categories of children who are the persons of concern to UNHCR, the approaches of UNHCR regarding the exploitation and its intervention, in addition to the what exactly the practical part when we discuss the UNHCR framework from child protection case management. Finally, we will answer the question of what next. So, next slide, please. Perfect. So UNHCR is considering the child definition, which defined in Article 1 of the CRC, which states that every human being below the age of 18 years, unless under the law applicable to the child, a majority is attended earlier. So this is the definition of child, also from CRC perspective and UNHCR. If we look at the 2020 report on global displacement of children, we will find, as you can see, that the children account for 30% of the world's population, but an estimated 42% of the forcibly displaced people. It's important to mention these percentage, which show the high number of refugee children worldwide, and it reflects how this matter is very critical. After knowing the huge number of the refugee children worldwide, it's important to clarify the children who are persons of concern to UNHCR. First of all, the children at risk, which consider as the umbrella of all categories of children, they are those children who are at the heightened risk as a result of exposure to risk in the wider protection environment, or at risk resulting from individual circumstances. For sure, there are so many examples for child at risk. It's mentioned by our colleague in UNICEF, the unaccompanied and separated children, head household, victims of trafficking, children who get married before the age that's already mentioned in the national system, and children who are in detention and has for example, a criminal record and who suffers from social discrimination, and those also, as mentioned by Dr. Hannah, the mental health or physical disabilities, and also children who are out of school. Based on the importance, second slide please, based on the importance of the two categories, which are the unaccompanied and separated children, we will provide further clarification firstly. We will start with unaccompanied children, as they are very important, the children who have been separated from both parents and other relatives, or from legally or customary perspective, that they don't have someone to take care of them. The second one, which is the separated children, are separated from both parents or previous legal or customary primary caregiver, but they are still with some of their relatives or family members. It's important to consider that these children, for example, if they are unaccompanied and separated, they might face another risk, which is, for example, unaccompanied child, and at the same time, he has a criminal record, for example. So, what are the protection that UNHCR provide for children, for those children, particularly children protection in UNHCR mean that we are protecting, advocating against all forms of discrimination. And we are at the same time preventing and responding to all kinds of risks. And one of it is the exploitation. UNHCR also, from a protection perspective, ensuring immediate access to appropriate services and ensuring durable solution in the child's best interest. So, as the child protection has always been considered for a core to UNHCR mandate, it's worth to mention that there are so many events, documents, actions has been taken by UNHCR through the years, starting with 1987 until today, 2021, when we revised the BIP, which is the best interest procedures. We issued the updated one. All these actions reflect the work that UNHCR is doing to develop tools, its tools that protects refugee children. So to narrow down our discussion, we will ask about the what exactly exploitation. Exploitation, it's mean, according to UNHCR, it's mean when an individual in a position or power takes attempts to take advantage of a child for their own personal benefits, advantages, or profit. There are so many examples for these kind of exploitation. For example, if it could be physical, sexual, financial, or social, military, or political. So what are the intervention approaches of UNHCR regarding the exploitation? As UNHCR, there are two approaches, prevention or response. The first one, prevention, means that UNHCR will work to prevent the exploitation before the case happens. That this could be done through providing the refugee and also the host community, including adults, children, with also relatives, with the appropriate and relevant training. And we also work on capacity building of the authorities in addition to the host country. On the other hand, we can say that the response, which is the second approach that we as a UNHCR follow, which means that the case already happened and it has been reported to UNHCR. At that moment, what we will do. We are talking, for example, inside the camps or outside the camps. If the case just came to us, we will start apply our best interest procedures. But firstly, we will check if there is a need for immediate action. For example, if the case is the child 7 years old and he needs immediate medical intervention or legal intervention, like we want to report the case to the police, we directly take the action. It's very important for us that there are two important elements or assessments that we do under the BIP, which is the best interest procedures. It's called the BIA and BID. So let's imagine that a child named X was a victim of exploitation. His case has been reported to UNHCR. UNHCR will assess the situation of the child. The assessment could be BIA, which is the best interest assessment, or BID, which is the best interest determination. The first one, we usually do an assessment made by UNHCR or a partner staff. We take direct an action regarding the situation of the child, considering the child best interest. The second one, which is the BID, it's a strict procedures we usually do in UNHCR. We will have a panel, including UNHCR staff, including, for example, other agencies like the ICRC or UNICEF as well. They join us, or also the national entities as well in the host country. And we take a decision, we decide what is the appropriate thing that we can do for the child. So what's next? The other slide, please. What's next? In order to protect the children in the refugee camps or outside also the camps, it's important to work on strengthening a number of matters. 3 matters I can say is, the first one is strengthening the prevention mechanisms. We have to work on strengthening the awarenesses of the refugees or host community, including families, children themselves, or relatives, or anyone can be a part of that. The second one, or the second point that needs to be strengthened, is the capacity of the agencies, for example, UNHCR, UNICEF, or others, to help the agency to respond and provide the children with appropriate protection. The third one, as the country is, or the national system playing a really important role, we need to strengthen the child protection national system. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's very comprehensive to understand your approach, and I can see that, you know, from previous panelists, Mr. Saji Thomas and you, that prevention and response, we have to look at the problem from two different angles to make sure that we can prevent, and also we can help children who already encounter some exploitation or challenges. And from here, we would like to talk more about government involvement, how the child protection unit in different governments can help to alleviate the suffering for these children. With us today, Dr. Fedex Bay, Deputy of Child Protection Unit in Joint Forces Command and Operations Officer in the Evacuation and Humanitarian Cell. Dr. Fahid, it's important for us to see as a government, not like as an international organization or the UN agency, how we can contribute to help children in conflicts, how we can help children on the ground. I know that we have maybe a unique experience to have a child protection unit in the joint forces, but we are happy to see that you have very successful results and you are close to families to help their children amid the conflict.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. This is Lieutenant Colonel Dr Fedex Bay, Deputy of the Head of the Child Protection Unit from the Joint Forces Command. First of all, on behalf of General Abdullah Al-Hubabi, the Head of the Civil Military Operation in the Joint Forces Command, I would like to thank King Salman Relief Center for holding such a knowledgeable event, and I'm very glad to be part of this great event. And if you don't mind, I will shed light my presentation on some of the efforts that have been made and is still being made by the Joint Forces Command in order to protect children in the areas of conflict, and also to rehabilitate and integrate them with their families in Yemen, with the cooperation with the cooperation of different governmental organizations and institutes, and with the presence or the help of the legitimate government. Okay, I will start my presentation. As I told you, I am one of the members of the Child Protection Unit, and this unit has been established upon the request of the United Nations General Secretary to make a unit in the Joint Forces Command and in the coalition in order to go through the procedures and mechanism and adapt the mechanism that guarantee the protection of children. Let's start with my introduction. As you can see, can you get back again, please? The catastrophic situation in which children live in armed conflict today has made the international community intensify its interest in protecting children by strengthening the necessary legal frameworks and by enhancing laws in several branches of public international law, in addition to the provisions of international humanitarian law and the law of armed conflict. And as I said, despite all the efforts that have been made and still being made to protect children in the armed conflict, and despite the huge number of mechanisms and rules adopted to protect the vulnerable segment of people, still the end result of the suffering of those children is catastrophe. Next. Now I will, as I mentioned, that the Child Protection Unit has been established in September 2017, upon the instructions of the Joint Forces Commander to develop mechanisms that sustain occurrence of casualties amid children in the framework of military operations in Yemen. Next. Now and also I will talk about the duties of the Child Protection Unit and the main backbone of this unit. And as you can see, this unit has been established to address all issues related to the violations against children in Yemen, including recommendations for establishing a Child Protection Unit and to deal with the received information regarding any violations against the children. We have in the unit a hotline that we receive any calls inside from the areas of conflict in Yemen or in the borders that tells or inform about any violations toward the violations of the children, and we deal with that in a serious matter. Also, another duty of the Child Protection Unit is to develop and recommend measures that ensure children protection against any physical or psychological assaults. Next. Another major issue from the unit is that we provide services for leaders in regard to armed conflict and children protections by holding training or webinars, workshops, and we try to educate the personnel of the armed forces how to protect children in the armed conflict when finding them fighting with the armed group or with the official army, because it is against the against the humanitarian law to have those children fighting with them in the areas of conflict. Another duty for the unit is to recommend rehabilitation of children affected from armed conflicts. And as I said, that the coalition has make a shelter or a housing for the children who are being found in the areas of conflict in the South region, just to help those children and to provide different services, nutrition, food, health services for those people in order to make sure that they are safely in a good condition and in a good way. Another duty for the unit is to develop the standard procedures in handing over the recruited children that, as I said, the unit assist the legitimate government with the presence of different governmental organizations to hand over the children to their family and to reintegrate them with their with the civilian society and with their families. Next. Okay, now we will talk about the recruitment of children in areas of conflict, and we know that it is prohibited, and the recruitment of children is among the 6 grave violations against children identified by the United Nations. So we must help and educate people and the armed forces not to use the children fighting with them in the areas of conflict, and this is really a flagrant violation, and it is against the international humanitarian law. Next. In fact, from my experience and working in the unit, the terrorist groups, I mean the Houthi groups who cope against the legitimate government, have sought to support their compact by exploiting children and forcing them to fight with them, even by force, by giving the money for their families. And this started since the beginning of the 2012, and then increased to a greater extent in 2014, specifically after they seized the power in Yemen, and they cope against the power and the leader of Yemen. And as you can see, this the picture here, they are using, this is real, it is a truth that they are going to the schools to take those children by force and force them to fight with them, as so they are the victims and the harshest or the highest victims of this armed conflict. Next. Now I will shed light or speak about the coalition commitment to the international humanitarian law from the commencement of this aid or of the coalition aid to the Yemeni government. The coalition is committed to the international humanitarian law and to the principle of the human rights, and they are doing their efforts to achieve the maximum protection for civilians, and especially children in particular. And this goes through fulfilling different obligations to protect those children. They are as follows: by spreading awareness among the coalition forces on the protection of children during armed conflicts, through, as I said, training and holding workshops in different places, like in Riyadh, Jeddah, Dammam, and different areas of Saudi Arabia, for the personnel of the armed conflicts, to educate them and enhance their knowledge about the necessity of protecting children through the conflicts. Also, developing procedures to prevent child casualties or injuries, and harness or possibilities to avoid directing attacks on schools and hospitals in air raids, coordinating with the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations on Children and Armed Conflict. Based on that, and according to the cooperation between the coalition and the Secretary and the Office of the Special Representative of the child and the children, memorandum of understanding has been signed, or to do a lot of important points, so we can guarantee the protection of children in the armed conflict. And this memorandum of understanding has been signed on March 25th, 2019, as I said, to enhance the protection of children affected by the armed conflict. Also, formation. One of the important issues to show the coalition commitment to the international humanitarian aid is to establish the Child Protection Unit, which considered the first among all armies all over the world, and it has been established and dedicated by the United Nations Secretary General and the Joint Forces Commander. So just to guarantee the protection and to help the members of the United Nations of the Child Protection Unit to know the measures and mechanism for the protection of children in the armed conflict. Also, the Child Protection Unit meet or goes to Yemen in a periodic time to meet the tribal sheikhs and to meet the influential people inside Yemen, and just to educate them and help them not to take or force their children to fight in the battle of fields or the fields of battles, because this is they are under 18 and they shouldn't be part of the conflict, and they shouldn't be victims for the armed conflicts. Next. Now we will transfer and move to know some of the coalition forces efforts to protect the children through the represented by the Child Protection Unit. As I said, the coalition forces are interested in providing humanitarian aid to the Yemeni people from the commencement of this war and before, as well as giving great attention to protecting children in areas of conflict and disaster. The coalition forces rehabilitated and handed over a total of 147 Yemeni children to their families to integrate them with their families and with the civilian society with the presence of different governmental organizations that participate or took part in the handing over of those children. Next. Here are some pictures for the children who have been handed over to their families. As you can see, different governmental organizations has participated to hand over those, with giving them some presents, some money to help them and to return them back to their families. Next. Next, please. Also, the most, as I mentioned, the coalition, the total number of children that have been handed over to their family is about 147, and the recent one is a 16 years old who has been handed over 3 or 2 months ago to his family to be integrated with the civilian society. And with the presence of King Salman Relief Center, Human Rights, and the Saudi Red Crescent. Next. Also, with the coordination with the request of the some international organizations, which is the ICRC, we received a request from them to facilitate the entry of 14 children who have been found fighting with some of the armed groups or in the field of battles, and the Child Protection Unit has assisted and facilitated the handing over of those 14 children to their families. It was in 2012 also. Next. These are pictures of the, you can see they are still youngs or children, okay? Go please, next. Also within the framework of the coalition forces commitment to applying international humanitarian law and its customary rules to the military operations, the Joint Forces Command, represented by the Child Protection Unit in the civil military operations, held similar courses in attendance and remotely for members of the coalition's forces in different topics as the international humanitarian law and workshops which organized by different organizations like the King Salman Relief Center or by the Saudi Red Crescent, just to enhance the knowledge of the armed forces personnel to deal in a good way to protect the children in the armed conflict. Next. Also, with the cooperation with the Office of the Secretary, with the Office of the Child Protection Unit Secretary, representative of the Secretary General for Children and And armed conflict, a TOT course has been held to also with the that has been provided from the members of the Office of the Special Representative, just to give some knowledgeable information, a lot of information for the personnel of the armed conflicts to enhance and educate them how to deal in a better way, and how to save children when they find them in the borders of the borders between the two countries, Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and just to provide the full protection for them. Next. As you can see here, this is the start of the training that held by the Mrs. Gamba, the head of the office. Next. Also, as part of the coalition forces interest in the children and providing them with medical, psychological, and nutritional care, the Child Protection Unit makes periodic visits to the shelter headquarters to see and verify the services provided to the children. In the South region, there is a housing for the children, and after finding them in the battlefields, they are being taken to this housing by the airplanes, and they are being provided with the medical and different services, and to save them in a better condition until they urgently handed over to the legitimate government to send them back to their families and integrate them with the civilian community. Next. And as you can see, this is the clinic, and there are a lot of doctors, about 18 doctors, and different assistants for them to provide the medical service for those children. They are given the check, and if they need if they have a serious problem, they are taken to the hospitals of the armed conflict, and they are being treated like Saudis in this housing. Next. 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 At the end of my presentation, to ensure the protection of children in armed conflicts, the parties of the dispute must adhere to the international standards that define the children as any person under the 18 age, and to observe the prohibition of recruitment and use of children under the age of 18 in line with the optional protocol on the involvement of children in armed conflict. This is the end of my presentation, and thank you very much for your listening. Back to you, Dr. Hannah.
Thank you, Dr. Fahid. It's really important to understand, from your point of view, how you can contribute also to help children on the ground. I think the work that you are doing, is contributing to enhance child protection. And also it's important to see how you do the coordination, and maybe also later on we can focus more on how you coordinate these efforts between the legitimate governments, the organizations, and also families, and the acceptance to accept these children who formerly associated with the armed conflict. So now we will talk more about the international humanitarian laws and human rights. With us, Ms. Nishat, legal advisor to the ICRC operations in the Middle East. Welcome, Ms. Nishat.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for having me here. Thank you to the King Salman Relief Center for giving me this opportunity to be on this excellent panel to talk about the protection of children from exploitation in armed conflicts. What I was asked to speak about today is the legal framework, and inspired by the way that you put together the agenda, which I thought was really excellent, looking at the problem of exploitation of children in a broader, more holistic way. I would also like to present the law as a system. So the law, as we know, is a tool that helps societies to respond to certain problems. And of course, we know that societies are complex, and this means that law is also complex. And in my presentation, where I talk about the rules which underpin and give protections to children in armed conflict, I will talk about specific laws on the issue, but I will also talk about other laws and more general laws. So I will draw on the rules that are applicable in armed conflict in general, which benefit everyone. So for instance, where children are a part of the civilian population, they benefit from the general protection against direct attack. Where children are detained, they benefit from the general protection against ill treatment. I will also talk about rules that are applicable in armed conflict that are general, but might have some special significance for children and their exploitation. So for example, rules which benefit families, and the rule of IHL that families should be kept together as much as possible. It applies to everyone, but it's of particular relevance to children in order to help prevent their exploitation. And then, of course, I will also talk about rules that are applicable specifically to children, since that's what we're here to talk about today. The basic underpinnings of IHL applicable to children is children are particularly vulnerable, that they're entitled to special respect and protection under the law, and that they should be considered first and foremost as victims. And we see these three ideas appear again and again in the legal system and the protection of children. The way that I would like to structure this presentation is to divide it into three parts. One is the rules which help to create an environment where the risk of exploitation is minimized, the rules which explicitly prohibit exploitation, and the rules which protect children, nevertheless, when they have been exploited. And as has been talked about before, what I mean here by exploitation is what the law talks about, which is recruitment, not only to take part in hostilities, but for a variety of roles: cooks, porters, messengers, spies, sexual slaves, forced laborers. Of course, I also mean sexual exploitation, including forced prostitution, and abuse or slavery, including sexual. So what are the rules which help create an environment where exploitation is minimized? From the ICRC's experience around the world working in situations of armed conflict, the types of factors that we see which create the conditions for exploitation from the perspective of children is, for instance, separation from family, disruption of normal life, lack of medical care, including their mental health, and a lack of means. There are, of course, other reasons depending on the particular situation, but these are the things that we see very often contributing to a situation where children find themselves in exploitation. IHL protects families, and it has obligations applicable to parties to the conflict to maintain family unity and to allow family contact. It also has rules that protect as much as possible family normal life from being disrupted. So of course we have the rules on the conduct of hostilities and what can be attacked, what can't be attacked, which seek to minimize the effect on civilian population. But here, one of the things that's specifically relevant is the family of rules that we have in IHL related to access to education. So both in international and non-international armed conflict, parties to the conflict are encouraged to allow access to education as much as possible. What the ICRC finds in its experience is that being able to attend school, continuing education, gives children this sense of normalcy, which can act as a buffer from being exploited. Of course, the lack of medical care, including psychosocial support and mental health support, can contribute to exploitation as well. And IHL, of course, protects medical assistance. The lack of means is something else that we see contributing to the risk of being exploited. And here, IHL contains specific rules on access to assistance. In the first place, parties to the conflict are obliged to ensure that the needs of the people in the area they control are met, where they're not met, to allow the population to access assistance, and where children are separated from their families, IHL has specific rules on having their needs met. IHL also has rules on the needs of people who are displaced, and of course, children who are displaced benefit also from these rules in order to have their needs met. There are also, of course, rules that explicitly prohibit exploitation of children. And here, there is the question of recruitment, where we have provisions in the additional protocols, the Geneva Conventions, in the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and the optional protocol to that convention. There are two things perhaps to remember here, that the various bodies of law, IHL and human rights law, which form up the legal framework here, have different age standards and have different things that they prohibit. So there are some instruments which prohibit recruitment under 15, others raise that age to 18, and there are some differences in the treaty law which prohibit direct participation and or indirect participation. Of course, sexual exploitation, forced labor, and slavery are always prohibited. And that is also a great source of protection for children from exploitation. But of course, children are exploited. They may find themselves forced to prostitute, they may be recruited, they might find themselves actually participating in hostilities or taking part in indirect acts. And IHL, nevertheless, has a set of rules to protect the children who have been exploited. Here, of course, I come back to the basic principle that children are first and foremost victims. So children may find themselves in detention because a party to the conflict is detaining fighters from the other side. Here, IHL has rules on how children should be detained. They should be separated from adults unless they're part of a family unit, in which case they should be housed with their families. And IHL also has age-appropriate detention standards for children. This means that where children are detained, not only do they benefit from humane treatment, etc., but the way their detention standards should be appropriate to the fact that they're children. They should have more access to recreational activities that's age-appropriate. They should have access to education while they're in detention. Children may also find themselves being prosecuted for acts that they've committed while they were part of a fighting force. Here, they should be treated as children. So alternatives to prosecution must be explored. If they are to be prosecuted, juvenile justice standards should be applied to them. And if they are prosecuted and found guilty under the standards, then alternatives to detention must be explored. Where children are not in detention and not being prosecuted, but they have been released and they're being reintegrated, or after they've been detained and prosecuted, they're released and they're being reintegrated, IHL contains rules, of course, as I mentioned earlier, on family unity and family links. And here we find that all the rules which helped create an environment to protect children against exploitation are also crucial in their reintegration. So they will often be in need of medical care, including mental health. We also find that that education and access to education gives children who have been exploited a sense of normalcy again. It can also help to create or reduce the amount of stigma that has been attached to them. And of course, being reintegrated with their families and the communities is always helpful for their general reintegration back into society. And all of these things, again, are reflected in the law. So essentially, to ensure that children are protected from exploitation, states and parties to the conflict should create holistic systems. They should, of course, put in place very strong laws. They should instruct their forces appropriately about IHL and the human rights standards that are applicable. But they should also put in place systems to respond to children, both boys and girls, who have been exploited. And here, it's not just the what, which is the law, but also the how. And children must be at the center of how the law is being implemented and adopted. And here I speak of the dignity, the well-being, and the agency of children, so the right to privacy that children have nevertheless. And always the involvement of children in ascertaining their needs and how best to respond to them will also assist in ensuring that that the system in place to prevent the exploitation of children is really functional. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Nishat. It's really important to understand the legal framework, and you raised the most important question, how? But from our side, we always ask why, because why it's not implemented as we read it, because, you know, sometimes when you read all these laws and protocols, the Security Council resolution, you become a little bit optimistic, but in reality, you know, sometimes we will ask why it's not enforced or why it's not implemented as expected. We still need to do a lot, and maybe we can also talk about this later, you know, how we can work together to enforce these laws to help these children from different perspective. For example, for KS relief, it's important to understand it from a humanitarian context, how we can contribute. And this will take us to Ms. Sandra Mainet, Children Associated with Armed Forces and Armed Groups Advisor in Plan Canada. And also she's co-leading the Global CAFAG Task Force under the Alliance for Children Protection and Humanitarian Action. Sandra, you are doing a lot in Plan International to have more reintegration projects, especially for girls. And this is a bit sensitive when you are talking about girls formerly associated with armed conflict and forces. We would like to hear from you more about the challenges and your approaches to do the reintegration, and also the successful stories. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'll see if I can share my screen. Yes. All right, so thank you for the opportunity to speak today. So today I'd like to talk to you about a particular program that we are implementing in Central African Republic. So in this country, we have implemented a context analysis. And for us, this is really the first step before designing a program for CAFAG. You need to first understand the reality of the context, the dynamics, the trends, how children are recruited, what are the roles they are playing, like who is involved, and also the challenges they're facing to their reintegration. So in Central African Republic, there is a context analysis implemented this year. This was an interagency effort, so this was not only involving Plan. And this was done with tools that were designed by the Global Task Force on CAFAG. A number of tools are still being piloted this year. And so a lot of information came out from this context analysis. But what I'd like to highlight here is we have conducted this analysis with both people from the community, so community members like men, women, as well as children. And we also involve former CAFAG through what we call mini workshops. And what we found is actually the data coming from former CAFAG was so rich and so much more interesting in a way to help us then design programs. And this is this data that I want to share with you today. So this is just a quick highlight. But one of the questions we asked to former CAFAG was, what are the risk factors to recruitment? Like what are factors that influence your recruitment? We asked these questions to girls and to boys. So this is a table summarizing the findings from this discussion. You will find here things that are very similar to what Nishat was saying earlier, like things around the lack of access to services and poverty. So these are like quite typical things that we see in a number of countries. I'd like to draw your attention to a couple of findings. One is related to boys, for example, their desire to be respected and honored in their community. And that was one of the drivers to their recruitment. And what we found is that those children in CAR, when they're part of an armed group, they actually find some respect. They find a status there that they don't have in the community. So their skills are acknowledged, like they are respected for what they bring to the group. And that has a lot of influence on their intention in the group and also what is driving them to those groups. Another thing that I found very interesting from the girls' perspective is one of the reasons why they join armed forces and armed groups is because they lack the means to manage menstruations. So just access to basic toiletries and hygiene products was one of the reasons why they join armed groups, because armed groups are providing this to them, or they're giving them the money to then procure those items. I found that very, very shocking, actually, as a finding from this analysis. And actually, the girl said, to prevent recruitment or to facilitate or to prevent re-recruitment, you need to provide dignity kit to girls, right? So this was one of the solutions that girls suggested. Another point that I find interesting here is at the society level, girls reported that social norms that consider girls as inferior and supporting girls' exploitation was one of the risk factors as well. And they felt like that was basically leading to their recruitment and to their exploitation within armed groups. So these are like some just key information, but this information will then inform programs. And if you want particularly to work on prevention, then you need to address those risk factors to be more effective in your prevention programs. The second part of this presentation is around the roles and responsibilities. And again, here there are things that were mentioned earlier that are quite typical in terms of roles that children play. There are combatants, there are cooks, cleaners, spies, messengers. So these are some of the typical roles that we found from the context analysis. But when we ask former CAFAG, then we realize there is a lot more roles that they're playing in those armed groups. And it's a lot more diversified and than what we thought initially. I'd like here to draw your attention to, on the girls' side, to some of their roles, such as the transportation of corpses and injured combatants, the fact that they collect money from shops, for example. They also clean the ropes. So that was one girl who reported that she was cleaning the ropes that were used for torture and hanging. Some of them are in charge of summary execution. They're used as jailers, as translators. So it's a lot more than just being a cleaner or a spouse or a combatant. It's a variety of roles. Regarding boys, there are things that were interesting here as well. Things around finding wives for commanders. Some of them were even used as traditional healer. So that particular boy said then he was really recognized within the group with this particular skill. And that made it very difficult for him to leave the group because there he had that recognition and respect that we were just talking earlier about. Some of them were in charge of robbery operations. So you see, it's not just you follow the troops and then you follow the orders. Here, this child was in charge of a robbery operation, to planning, to execution. It's a lot more responsibilities. Some of them were also in charge of buying and selling drugs. And here we can see then the risk when they are reintegrated to be recruited then again, but by criminal groups, for example, by gangs. So if their integration is not well done, here they're a high risk of being recruited by other criminal groups. So Now, more specifically on the programs that we implement in Central African Republic, we have first a prevention program where we try to prevent recruitment. So here we have this prevention campaign, but more importantly, we have all this approach where we discuss with the community. So we have group discussion with women, with community leaders, because we know in CAR, community leaders are often involved in the recruitment of children. They put pressure on families. They are often linked to the armed groups recruiting for various reasons, like they want to seek protection or they want to defend their territories. And so community leaders are part of the recruitment process. So involving them in those discussions will contribute to the prevention. Another point is the involvement of religious leaders. We know in Central African Republic, they are really a key player. They have a lot of influence and they have the power to shift social norms. So today, recruitment in armed groups is acceptable in Central African Republic. Like children defend their territories, defend their ethnic group. But if we manage to engage religious leaders and to have them on our side, then they have this power to shift social norms and make recruitment unacceptable. So these are some of the strategies that we are using in Central African Republic. Then regarding the reintegration. So here we work with both boys and girls. But I'd like to focus a bit more on girls here. The program there is very interesting. There's the proportion of girls is quite high. We're close to that 40%, I think. So it's a high proportion of girls. So there we have programs. So it's quite typical. We do medical checks. We have a case management approach. We offer life skills sessions. And there in those life skills, we started to integrate, as we progress in the program, some sessions on sexual and reproductive health. And this is because we found out that a very large proportion of those girls had sexually transmitted disease. And so it was important first for them to get treatment with medical support, but also to do some prevention. So that's why we included those sessions. We also include sessions on the promotion of self-esteem. And it's because we realize that these girls are facing a lot of guilt. Not all of them, but some of them have a lot of guilt in having been associated to this group. Some of them have committed acts of violence, or just because they were part of witnessing violence. Some of them said, just because I was eating stolen food, and in her mind, with her values, this was not acceptable. So helping them to rebuild their self-esteem is important for the reintegration process. You cannot be accepted by others if you don't accept yourself first. Then we have programs to facilitate access to education and vocational training. And here we added something I found interesting, which is a mentoring approach by a professional. So it's not enough to have been trained on the trades, for example, to have financial literacy, maybe a startup grant. But often girls lack that self-confidence to really establish their business. And that mentoring approach by professional, and particularly these are professional women who are already established in the same type of business, this has been an approach that was found very successful to encourage girls in their business. We also found that at some point of the program, we had about 50% of the girls who had children that were born of sexual violence. And we found that we need to add also additional services for these girls, otherwise they will be disadvantaged compared to the other girls who don't have children in accessing services. So we put in place daycare centers in the community so that girls could attend the training programs the same way as other girls and boys. Some other findings or lessons learned, let's say, from this program is that we as well as in the prevention, but also in the reintegration program, we need to involve the community. The community is really at the core, and this is to prevent re-recruitment. Often this is valid for both boys and girls, when they come back to their community, they may no longer work for the armed group, but in their mind, they're still part of the group. And so they're there almost like a standby. And then at any time, if needed, they can go back to the group. So this is why we need to involve the community so that this doesn't happen. And then we make sure that those children are actually disengaged, but also they de-identify themselves as being part of the group. The second lessons learned is a group approach was found more successful for reintegration than individual approach. So what I mean here is we realize that when we do follow-up, for example, sessions with children, if we have those sessions with a few children that are living in the same community, we found that that was more successful. And it's because through those sessions, children can share their challenges, their successes as well. And so other children realize that they're not alone in that situation. And that contributed to form like a support network within the community. So those children didn't feel alone with their problem anymore. They were forming this group, and there was some solidarity among those children, and they felt a lot stronger. And this was particularly the case for the girls, like they felt much stronger together than alone. Same for when some of the girls are placed in foster families, for example, while we're tracing their parents. We found also that placing two girls in the same family was helped for the reintegration of those girls. And for the same reasons. It means that they were supporting each other in that family. They didn't feel so alone with strangers. And so again, that support network facilitated the reintegration. So yeah, this is quickly an overview of the program we're doing in Central African Republic. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, for giving us this information, because it's important to see how you can implement this project. It's really sensitive, and also if you look at the activities, it tackles most of the issues. And this will allow me, to ask, you mentioned the community leaders, the religious leaders. The cultural aspect is not mentioned all the time in the implementation or in the designing phase. So I would like to open the floor to discuss this more, how we can include the cultural aspect in order to do a proper, intervention to help children. Especially we are talking about minors below 18, as Ms. Sarah mentioned, before. Of course, we need the support of the families, the network, the society. So how we can build or discuss the social behavior change. And if you allow me, Mr. Saji Thomas, you can start, because you talked about also the mental health, psychosocial support, and the new strategy includes the social behavioral change. How do you do that? How you can help these children, especially for the mental health, psychosocial support, how we can convince the family. We have certain projects here at KS Relief, and we encounter some challenges when we talk about psychosocial support, mental health. It's not feasible, or it's not, something that it's a message that you can convey easily. So if you can, from all the panelists, we start with Mr. Saji, how we can enhance the cultural aspect in our humanitarian actions.
Thank you. I think it's an excellent point. Culture, how we intervene, mental health. I spoke about mental health before, and probably this data is outdated, but there was this WHO study a few years ago where they tried to treat depression, among people. I mean, it's not WHO, it was by somebody else, but it was stated by WHO in some of the documentation. And so they administered the same drugs to a set of people. I think probably in the US, but definitely in the West, and then the same drugs to people, I think, in India. Yeah, and then they went back to study them after 2 years or so. And people in India showed much better improvement, in terms of their depression. And then people in the West did not really show much improvement. They also looked at the drug consumption pattern, and it showed that in the West, probably in the US, they were adhering to the plan. So they were taking the drugs as prescribed. In India, it's India, they didn't bother, and they focused more on getting back into community. And I think what they concluded was what really needed was social support, people being around them. So you ignore drugs and then somehow went back to your ways of life. Whereas in the West, they quite focused on the drugs and adhering to that. So, I mean, this may not be a very good example, but just to show that, especially when you refer to mental health, it can mean different things in different, social settings. You refer to religious leaders. So in some community settings, you don't go to see, a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Just going to meet your priest or somebody, the priest nearby can be a source of support for you. In many settings, you have organic community groups, where you interact. That reconnection helps you to cope with things much faster than an individualized care and approach. So, and I think it's very important that whenever we introduce interventions, to look at that community context and see how people cope, and then introduce something that is culturally appropriate. This is very much part of a lot of the guidance that UNICEF has also been working on. So, I mean, we all know the pyramid of interventions for addressing mental health and psychosocial support. So, only 3 to 5% of people who need support will need specialized care. Will need to see a specialist. The vast majority of people can take care of themselves, support each other, and then connect with community groups around them. So what happens is in emergencies, community groups break down in conflict settings. How soon can you, revitalize those community networks and family networks? I mean, we spoke about family reunification. So family reunification, be it children or adults, activating those community support networks which were there earlier. And then, yeah, so I would say that is the critical piece. And I mean, I spoke about the Sri Lanka experience. There again, we were looking at some of these, approaches. But I'll stop there. I'm sure the others have a lot to add as well.
Thank you for sharing this. And if Sarah, if you can add from UNHCR perspective, how we can, tackle the issue culturally, how we can, raise the awareness among families that these are children. We understand it's a difficult situation, difficult context, but how we can, give them hope that their children might be the future for them.
Okay, thank you. I think it's very important just to confirm what Mr. Sajid said, because assessing the situation of the community is very important to understand what exactly they need and how you can create your intervention. As UNHCR, one of our very important tools, which is we usually use to understand the community, is the focus group discussions, which is meeting with the community, understand their needs and how they want the agency to intervene. So in order to create any projects or any programs to help them to understand what exactly the issue and the importance of the issue. It's very important, as Mr. Sajid said, that we understand the culture of the community itself. So I think just a confirmation to what he said, I think it's the starting point for everyone is just to understand that each community, what exactly they need, and make them involved, as UNHCR is doing regarding the community-based protection. Back to you, Dr. Hannah.
Thank you, Sarah. So this also, it's a very it's very complicated to discuss it, because what is acceptable there, it's not acceptable here. And as you mentioned, to do the really thorough needs assessment is vital to make sure that we are doing the right intervention. And for Dr. Fedex, I totally understand that you are doing a remarkable job in a very difficult context. But however, in Yemen especially, the culture of a child carrying a weapon is normal before the armed conflict. So now we are talking now during the conflict, of course, the number of children has increased. So how do you deal with this from a cultural perspective? How do you help families to understand that these children are not allowed to carry the weapons? How you can encourage them to help their children to be in school? We are struggling in different projects that some families, they don't see the importance of education, although it can be that the way for them to go from this situation to a better situation.
Yes, Dr. Hannah, I just want to say that we must understand that, as you said, the culture in Yemen, they used to even give their children from the childhood some weapons to carry them, and they make it like as a manhood instead of. Also, we face this problem when we bring or found some children, and we try to give them some games in the housing while they are being there, and they said, no, we are men, we are not kids, and this is a type of culture. And they said, I can go to the battlefield, and you are bringing me some games like PlayStation or something like that, and this is a culture. So what the child protection unit is used to do is to go, some members of the unit, they go to meet some of the tribes inside Yemen, and try with the cooperation with our members in the civil affairs in Yemen, and we try to give them some discussions, and discuss with them that this is against the law, the humanitarian law, and instead of sending them to fight with the armed groups or with the official army, just take them to the school. They will find a better life. They will be educated. They will know the true meaning of childhood. And we do a periodic visits to Yemen, just to educate those people and to tell them that they must have a moral and a legal obligations not to send those kids, and try not to be utilized in the military operations, and to ensure that they are protected in conflict. And please send them to school instead of the area of conflicts. That's all. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Hannah.
Thank you, Dr. Fedex. And also for ICRC, Ms. Nishat, we are talking about exploitation, and as we talked before, it's from being cook, spy, forced labor, sexual exploitation, etc. So how we can help these families, especially if the breakdown of the social ties is there, they may force their kids to have alternative livelihoods. So, and we have the international humanitarian laws. We have this very complicated situation. So how we can balance between this, and how we can help these families to understand, what can be done to have a better life, rather than just, to give up to send their kids to have forced labor or to be used in military?
Thank you very much. I think maybe one thing, if we're talking about culture, is maybe I can make a distinction between two types of culture. For example, we have an international culture. The Convention on the Rights of a Child is the most widely ratified treaty. The optional protocol to the rights of a child is also very, very widely ratified. The Geneva Conventions has been ratified by every country in the world, and customary international humanitarian law also applies to everyone. So here we're talking, of course, always about local culture, but there's also something that we have said as an international community that we're committed to, which is the rights of children and protecting children. So I think in a way, what the conversation we're having here today is, that's also part of our culture somehow. And how do we bring this local culture to reflect these commitments that we have made internationally? And the question that you ask is also a very good one. So when we're talking at the level of the family, we're talking about desperate people living in times of armed conflict, and the way that they see their lives, the way that they see their future. What are the reasons that then force them to put their children in a situation that perhaps they wouldn't otherwise? And here again, I think there are two things. I come back to it because, of course, I'm interested in international law. So I come back to the role of the state and the role of parties to an armed conflict and the obligations that they have. So for instance, the obligations they have to meet the needs of the people who are living in the areas that they control, the obligations they have to allow humanitarian access to these people, the obligations they have to make sure that in the way that they carry out the conflict, civilian infrastructure and civilian life is protected as far as possible, so that in the first place, people are not put in that position. And then, of course, there is something in the response. And here, as humanitarian actors, everything that's been said so far is exactly on point. We involve people. If these are the problems that they face, then they also are part of the solution. We ask children how they find their lives to be, why it is that how they feel about the situation they're in, what would they rather the situation be. We involve the families who put them in these situations, and we, of course, involve the armed actors who are also responsible. And this is part of the ICRC's work as well, to keep speaking to the parties to the conflict, to remind them that they are also responsible, that the responsibility doesn't just fall on the families or the children, but in fact, it's the laws that they've committed to.
Thank you so much. So, Ms. Sandra, you talked about several, ideas in your project. So, one important aspect you mentioned, the stigma. So again, we're going back to the same topic. It's the cultural aspect. So I read in one of your report that, especially for girls, if they are reintegrated, the families cannot live in the same location. So they would move to another location because they have this stigma that their girl was formerly associated with armed conflict. So how do you deal with that? How you can educate these families that still, it's not their fault. They are children. They may have better future if you allow them to have it and forget, their past.
I'm so sorry, Sandra. And I can't find the chat function. I need to leave. I'm chairing the next meeting at 6:30. So apologies, I'll have to sign out. It was a great meeting, all of you. I'm chairing the next meeting, so I can't even tell them that, I can do them later.
Thank you for your participation, and we're looking forward to have more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. Of course, it depends on the context. There are contexts where children are highly stigmatized, and particularly girls. We see that there is often this assumption that they've been sexually abused. If they come back with children, the stigma is even higher. And we have seen situations where the girls are accepted, but not the children, for example. So then girls are in the situation of choosing between their community and their family or their children. So these are like very, very complex situations. I'd like to talk about maybe some positive experiences. I'm thinking about South Sudan, for example, where there initially, when girls came back, they were rejected. They were rejected by the community, by their families as well, and it was extremely challenging for them. And then gradually, with the help of NGOs, but also just naturally, the religious leaders took responsibility and saying that we need to change this. This is our responsibility as community members to welcome back those girls. This is not their fault. They've been abducted. This is not their fault that they've been sexually abused. So now our responsibility is to welcome them back. And they use some religious texts as a basis. And because they have this power that I was talking about earlier, this power to change social norms, then they were able to change the perspective of the community, who then said, yes, we need to welcome back those girls because this is our responsibility to protect them. So it really depends on the context, but if you're able to find those key players who have this power, then it's possible to change the perspective of the community. And I think here there are two levels. There is a level of the family and the level of the community. Often the community will watch how the family welcome back the girl, and they will often mirror how they receive them. So the first thing is to work with the family, and often with the community will also have a replicated effect. For a child to be rejected by your own family, it's extremely challenging. And we've seen that this has a lot of impact on their reintegration. There's a lot of studies that have been done on this, and particularly the first reaction of parents will then determine how children reintegrate later on. So working with both families, there are great programs on parenting skills, specifically for parents of CAFAG. We have one toolkit that's been released recently by the Global CAFAG Task Force that can help to prepare the parents before the return of the children and then facilitate their integration. Thanks.
Thank you so much. It was a great discussion, and I think, you know, we learned a lot from different perspectives. And of course, we need to work together because we need to protect these children more and also to prevent the exploitation. And for now, you know, I would like to thank you all. Thank you for all these great points that you shared with us. And I'm sure there is a huge room for collaboration and discussion to help, you know, children in armed conflict. And I would like to reiterate the importance of more collaboration, because we're talking about many stakeholders, even if we're talking about the family, the organization, the government, and also the donor perspective. Because in one of Gamba's statements, she mentioned also we need more funding for these projects to protect the children. And sometimes, you know, people would look at the basic need, like, you know, food, like education, but still protection is really important for these children in armed conflict in order to have a sustainable development and sustainable peace, because they will not be a children, you know, after 10 years. So we need to build the community now with them gradually, so at least we have a better future for them. Thank you all for this great discussion, and we're looking forward to continuing our collaboration and tackle and discuss this topic from time to time, because I think it's a topic that's worth to have the discussion move on, and looking forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.